Hello friends! I come to you today with a fully voiceovered video. Why? I forgot to turn the mic on. Anyway, I'll be making the countryside blouse from Truly Victorian, and I'm hitting Halloween squarely on the nose this year with my fabric choices. I'm also making a hat for my costume, but I won't be finishing it before the end of this video. Are you brimming with anticipation? And there's the twisty, quirky crown of the hat, which still needs to be covered, attached, and lined. I started with the button plackets down the fronts, first pressing under ½ inch, then an additional inch. The left side was finished at that point, but the right side needed to be folded once more, this time to the front, and stitched again. Then I ran the gathering stitches at the top before attaching the fronts to the yoke. At this time, I decided to prep the back as well, running gathering stitches at the waist where the ties would be attached, as well as along the top edge. The little waistband and ties were then pressed, and the length of the ties stitched together. The waistband was pinned to the back of the blouse, and the back gathered to the band, and the ties tucked under the band ends. All of that was then stitched down. The yokes were pressed all nice and happy before the fronts were pinned to them. The fronts were gathered and sandwiched between the two yoke layers. Then all 3 layers were stitched together. After attaching the fronts, the yoke needed to be pressed and top stitched. The back of the yoke was then prepared for the blouse back, first by pressing the bottom edge of the lining layer up by ½ inch. The blouse back was pinned to the yoke back at the center, then gathered and pinned. The yoke lining was then brought down to match up with the outer yoke and pinned in place. And top stitched. Then I started on the collar, pressing the lower edge of the lining piece up by 1/2 inch and pinning it to the outer collar piece. This was then stitched together. I then turned the collar right side out and pressed. Okay, so I did a thing I wasn't supposed to do. Not a new development, but I was feeling particularly lazy that night. I pinned this collar straight onto the neck edge of the blouse and stitched it down. I know, there's a reason it's done the other way with the undercollar, but reasons. Also, it turned out a bit wonky in the end, but it's a Halloween costume and I will not apologize. End rant. Then I clipped the neck edge, pressed the seam allowance up into the collar, and top stitched it to finish. Side seams were done in the usual way. They were pinned, then stitched, but then trimmed and zigzagged instead of flat-felled, and pressed toward the back of the garment. I decided to zigzag the bottom edge to reduce bulk under the skirt. Then I got started on the sleeve plackets. This involved lots of marking and pressing before they even made it onto the sleeves. They were pinned to the sleeves, and that center box was stitched down, leaving the bottom edge unstitched. I then cut down the center and turned it through to the other side of the sleeve. It took me a while to figure out exactly how the folds needed to go. The narrow edge of the placket was stitched down. Then I pressed and stitched the wider side of the placket, but apparently not before marking the horizontal stitching line. The stitching line was steamed out of the placket. Before closing the sleeves, I decided to get the gathering stitches in at the sleeve heads. The underarm seam was then pinned and stitched. And trimmed and zigzagged. And pressed toward the back. I ran the gathering stitches at the cuff end, making sure not to catch the placket. Then I made up the cuffs in much the same way as the collar. Like, literally, exactly the same. The sleeves were gathered into the armholes, matching the sleeve seams with the armhole notches. Then they were sewn in, with another line of stitching 1/4 inch away within the seam allowance, and trimmed. Buttonholes and buttons were done off camera. Oh good Gord, I'm a pumpkin. This is peak Halloweening, folks. As always, if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe. I plan on making up the rest of the hat and the overblouse in streams, so if you're on Twitch and want to see that, head over and drop a follow. The link is below. I'm off to go bobbing for apples or something. Until next time, friends.